Hello everyone, welcome to the FBA 1023. This is a recording for the supplementary learning material, which is the ERM. So enterprise risk management consider how to manage risk for enterprise, which means a whole company. So the ERM is not just risk management for one part of the company, it is the risk management for everyone, for every department. Why does that matter? Because if you think about a large company, it might have hundreds of departments, each one faces different risk every day. So if they all manage risk separately, nobody see the full picture. So the ERM fixed that. It gives a whole company one way of looking at risk with one language, one process. So before we get into ERM properly, let's look at how risks was managed before ERM existed. So that will help us to understand why ERM was needed. This is a picture. You will see that there are 4 departments: marketing, accounting, personnel, and production. So how the risk was managed in the past. The traditional risk management is based on a silo approach or sometimes the stovepipe approach. The silo means each department manages its own risks alone without talking with each other. So, for example, for the marketing, they worry about the consumer demand. So, for example, what if consumers stop buying, and the accounting think about budget overrun or internal control failures. The personnel worry about the union relations, and the production worry about the technical decisions. So each department has its own list, its own process, and own reporting. Nobody share information across the silos. So each one is focused on its own risk. But what is the problem here? The first problem is the risks are connected. For example, one consumer demand problem might change the budget overruns. So the risk cannot be think separately. They have natural interconnection with each other. So if they don't talk, nobody sees how one factor might trigger to another one. And also, some risks affect the whole company. For example, if there is a economic recession, it will hit all the departments at once. And if we don't have some idea to avoid or mitigate risk in the whole company, like each company doesn't know how to manage that. And the third is sometimes if you manage the risk in silo, sometimes the efforts is wasted because, for example, if you have 2 departments, one is exporting something and one is importing something. Here you might have some international trading, and then you have the currency risk, like exchange rate might fluctuate, which cause the change of your revenue and your payment. However, if you consider these 2 departments together, you might find out maybe the part of the input currency is hedged with the output currency. Then you don't have to buy those a lot of futures or those a lot of forward contract to hedge your exchange risk, because maybe another department can help you to hedge this department's risk. So if you only consider those risks separately, a lot of time and money is spent doing the like useless work in a different place, or maybe the same work. For example, two parts, they are managing the same risk. If they assess the risk by themselves, they have to do double work. So that is not efficient enough. That is why the traditional risk management is not good enough. Because of that, we start to map all of the risk into this framework. We start to think about what do these risks have in common. So you might find this is a matrix, which is a fundamental tool in ERM. So events are characterized by two dimensions. The first one is probability, like how likely it is to happen, and severity, like how bad would it be if it happened. Then you have 4 different groups. For example, if the consumer pay you late than it should be, then you might have some risk. And this might happen quite frequently, so they might have a high probability. And the problem, like the impacts of this late payment, might not be that big because it happens all the time. So most of it, they are small severity, especially for the smaller contract, which is not a huge contract with a big cash flow. It can be allocated into this group. Okay, so now you have 4 quadrants, and for the high probability and low severity, this part, and also the high severity but low probability, both of them, they are actionable zone. Like there might be many active mitigation makes the most difference, and the management's decision have a lot of impacts to these 2 quadrants. But there are also retained quadrants and also avoid quadrant, which means that you might have low probability and low severity, which can be ignored. Like you can just retain it because you can afford to retain it. And there are high probability and high severity, which you have to avoid. Those are the risks you have to avoid transfer, so that you won't suffer from those big risks. Okay, after we do that mapping, we still have the risks in different departments. So the risks now not only has been categorized based on the severity and the probability, but also it has been categorized by different types: strategic, financial, operations, and hazard. So the strategic means they might be related to long-term direction and competitive position. For example, the consumer demand, which means in marketing department, they worry about the strategic risk that whether the market demand uncertain, like the demand from the market is uncertain, like is fluctuated, or there might be some changes in the consumer preference, or for example, they might forecast the future sales, but it is inaccurate forecasting. And for the accounting, the budget overrun could be a strategic mistake. For example, the actual cost might exceed planned budget. And the personnel in strategic risk can be union relations, which means there might be some strikes or some negotiation conflicts. This is also very important for the strategic development in long-term direction, because it will cost a higher labor cost and that is a big pressure for the company, and it also affects the strategic flexibility. For example, the firm might be difficult to restructuring or automation because of the relations with the union. And the last part is the production department. Their strategic risk could be the technology decision. For example, they might make wrong choice for picking out what is the equipment they want, or they might have late adoption or too early adoption for some new technology. Well, the financial risk is something affect with money, so they could be recessions, some defaults, some higher cost, or some uncompetitive cost structures. Then the operation risk is day-to-day problems, as we talked in the operational risks, and the hazard risk here is not about the default, which we have mentioned in the credit risk management. Here, the hazard risk are some risks which are traditional insurable loss risks related to, for example, fire, injury, damage, and legal liability. So those could be unpredictable. Sometimes it's external, and there are some events which are not like cannot be foreseen before that. So this could be like product liability, general liability, workers' compensation, and equipment fire. All of these are some hazard. So this is one way that the firm can categorize their risk into different categories and for different departments. Okay, now we talk about we need to consider all of this not separately, but we want to put them all into a holistic approach. So it means that we need to give all of these risks into some taxonomy, which means in the organization they are speaking the same language about the risk, and also they know the framework, like each department map those risks together. So that is the definition of the ERM. So the COSO describes the ERM as a process that holistically identifies, assesses, mitigates, and monitors risks. And the International Organization of Standardization defines ERM as a process that combines the organization's entire risk management activities in one integrated, holistic framework to achieve a comprehensive, cooperate perspectives. So instead of each department asking, what are my risks? The company asks, what are all our risks and how do they connect? So after classifying risks under ERM, we now need to assess them within the firm's context and define the criteria for judging whether a risk is acceptable. So what is the context? It means before you look at risk, first you need to understand the world around you. So it means everything which could affect your risks. So they could be laws, market, economy, culture, relations, technology, environment, stakeholders' needs, for example, the investors or consumers, what they want, and also the concerns, like what problems you are already facing. So why does it important? Because the same risk can look very different depending on where you are and what is happening around you. So you need to start with the content before you make any decisions, like what you want. So there might be two decisions you need to make. like two outputs. The first one is the risk criteria to be used to determine the acceptability of the risks. Like you need to determine whether this risk is acceptable or not. This is related to the context around you. And the second output, like the second thing you need to decide, is to specify other risk management activities, for example, the communication and consultation and risk assessment. Okay, when we assess a risk, we need to think about the expected, like the criteria and also the actions. But also we need to think about like what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That is the risk appetite. So there are two types of outcomes normally, like two type, or we can say two level of risks. So the first type is the expected outcome of risk consequence. So it is a normal situation within which there is no recession, no new killer technology, no innovations by competitors, and generally business as usual. And also there might be some worst case outcomes. For example, it is not normal, but it is something that you really don't want to happen. For example, there might be a major recession or a new technology. So based on these two different outcomes, the company need to think about not only the expected outcome, but also the worst case. And based on the context that we mentioned, we know that there might be normal situation and the unexpected situation. And then you need to do something to make sure that your company has resilience and robustness. Okay, so one important thing is that the company need to make sure that they can cope with the worst case. Those cases could be bad case, but they could be also some too much success. For example, you plan to sell something, but the consumer like this too much, then you might run out of your inventory, have some problem as well. So that is also some risks. So when you consider how to do the risk assessment, you need to consider several things. The first one is the risk attitude, which is like whether you are a risk taker or you are a risk advisor, or you consider risk as neutral. And also you consider risk appetite, like how much risk of the company is willing to take. So for the expected side, how much normal risk do we accept in our day-to-day business? And the worst case situation is that how bad can things get? So the risk appetite helps decision making. And then we have the risk tolerance, like how much capability and capacity do you have to respond or absorb the stress and the impacts. And the last one is the risk aware culture, which means you need to identify, assess, communicate the risks in your company. This should be a rule or some framework which is not only for one department but for the whole company. Like culture means everyone in the company, from the board to the front line, they understand the risk in the same way so that they identify and assess it in the same way. They communicate and report it, and after that they think about risk and reward together to trade off and make decisions together. That is a culture. So the culture of ERM is very important for a company. Okay, so for the risk culture, they understand again how to identify and assess risk in current and potential business activities. They communicate the current and potential risks, and also they take risks and reward into account in the business decisions. Okay, so this is a risk wheel, which is a representation of the full universe of the enterprise risks. Now you can see not so there are many small risks which can be um, classified into one of each category. So actually the ERM framework will ask people to report different type of risks, and then they classify those risks into different categories. So after they got to know those risks, there might be a further classification step that to identify whether this risk is in known probability or unknown probability, known severity or unknown severity. So the known probability and known severity could be, for example, like the car insurance claims. Like based on the past data, issuers know roughly how many claims will happen and how much they will cost. The risk is quite well understood because all the historical data will happen again. And the null probability and unknown severity could be like a natural disaster such as a flood. So we know flood happen in some certain areas. However, we don't know in the upcoming year, this year, whether it will be a small one or it will be a big one. So the severity is unknown. And the unknown probability and unknown severity could be something like equipment breakdown. For example, one equipment, if it breaks, then we know the cost to repair it. However, we don't know when or whether it will break this year. And the unknown probability and unknown severity could be something like the COVID. The worst case and the hardest one is the unknown event, which is something that you even don't know this one exists. This is the most dangerous risk, and you cannot plan anything for this because you don't know anything about it. So you need to build this company to be flexible enough to respond to these surprises. Okay, so if we have our risks classified and also we put it into the matrix with the high-low probability and the high-low severity, we can do something more. So this is a framework that we do it. We can classify the probability into critical, major, and manageable. Same for the likelihood, or we say the severity of the risk. We can classify it into remote, possible, and likely. So for each risk event, you can assess whether the probability of this is high or whether the severity of this is high. Then you can put it into one quadrant here. And once the risk is like classified, we need to consider whether we need to make some like react to this risk. So if it's a low one, like low, then you don't have to do anything. Or if it's a high, this could be a critical risk that you need to do mitigation to remove this or mitigate some risk to move this, for example, number 1 to be number 10 or number 9. So that is the way how the ERM trade those kind of risks. Okay, so this is easier to understand. Here we have one concept which is called residual risk, which means the risk that is left after treatment. So the risk impact is the original impact, and then we make some treatment to mitigate and reduce some part of risk. So we want to see what is the residual risk. Okay, so now we know that there might be high get avoided, and you might have something like, for example, this one, the middle one, like middle probability and middle severity. They still have some impacts, and they're in the amber area, so you can take some actions to manage it. The way to do it is to buy some futures, trade in derivatives, or buy some insurance. So the main idea here is to to make sure that your residual risk is acceptable. Okay, now we move from theory to a real company example. If you talk about Zurich Insurance Group, so you can pause here to read this page. Actually, Zurich Insurance Group is a firm which is quite famous in ERM because they have developed a really good ERM example, and they takes really long time, like 10 years, to develop this ERM, and they set the concepts and of different classifications, and also the most interesting part is the mindset. Like the Zurich doesn't treat risk as a way to mitigate all the risk, but they consider those risk taking as necessary for growth. Okay, so what are the objectives for the ERM in Zurich? Firstly, the company wants to use the ERM to protect the capital base by monitoring that risks are not taken beyond Zurich's risk tolerance. They want to enhance value creation and contribute to an optimal risk return profile by providing the basis of efficient capital deployment. They also want to use ERM to support Zurich's decision-making process by providing consistent, reliable, and timely risk information. They also want to protect Zurich's reputation and brand by promoting a sound culture of risk awareness and disciplined and informed risk-taking. Okay, so this is a framework of the Zurich risk management. So actually, the Zurich articulate the roles and responsibility of risk management throughout the organization, from the board of the director and the CEO to its business and functional areas. In fact, each business and functional or project team will have some designated as a risk owner to be responsible for identifying and addressing relevant risk exposures and to help embed ERM further in the business units and build a more open, positive risk culture. So one of the key elements of Zurich's ERM framework is to foster transparency by establishing risk reporting standards throughout the organization. So they regularly report on its profile, current risk issues, adherence to its risk policies, and improvement actions both at a local and a senior management level. JURIS has procedures in place for the timely referral of risk issues to senior management and the board directors. So you might find out there might be some strategic risk management, risk assessment and mitigation, risk qualification, transparency and governance and culture. So all of this become to be a major ERM framework, which means that all of these elements, they are connected together rather than being managed isolated. Now we come to a very well-known governance model, which is the 3 lines of defense. So for this search, they have 3 lines of defense so that like the risk can be managed line by line and it will not break through all the 3 lines. So the first line is in the business and functional error, and the second one is the group risk management, and the third one is the independent internal audit function. So for the first line, it is in like quite front line, like every employee, every team, every business unit owns the risks it generates. So the risk management is the part of their job. And the second line is in the group risk management. So now the risk has been combined and considered altogether as a group for the company. So the group risk management, there are some like compliance and legal department, like there are many of the parts in the company who will combine all of those risks together, and they set the standards, provide tools, and also they challenge the first line, like they don't own their own risk, but they provide the oversight. And the third line is independent. So this part, they assurance that the whole system is working, so they verify, they do not manage anything. So actually, the first one is the one who is managing risk. The second one is for oversight and supervision. The third one is to make sure that the second one is still working. Okay, so this is another way which can be reflected, which the 3 lines of defense can be reflected. So you might find out from the bottom to the top, we have the like the first one is the business unit level, the second is the group executive level, and the third one is the board level. Those are the 3 levels, but the 3 lines of defense is this way, like the risk taking is the first line, the risk control is the second line, and the dependent assurance is the third line. So the risk taking, the first line, is happened from the business management in the business unit level, but also it happens in the group level and the board level. And the risk control is the second part, which is more about the oversight. So all of the group chief risk officer, group finance, and risk committee, they are all doing some risk control as the second line. And the third line is the audit. This is a Zurich risk radar. It's a map that you still have different risks. However, now you might find they have their scopes, like from the short term to long term, but they still have their own way to classify the risks into different way. And also they might have the different way of probability and impacts, like severity. So all of the risks, any kind of risk, can be mapped to this radar. That is the way of search. It is not the way that we mentioned before, like the risk classification could be different for each firm. Actually, it is not like financial risk management, because the ERM is more rely on the feature of the firm itself. So any firm, they can have their own way to classify their risk and map their risk into different ways. So for Zurich, they classify their risk into these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways. You can pause here to look at each risk to try to understand how this get mapped and what does it mean for the different colors and circles. Okay, so after we identify those risks, we need to assess those risks. So one of the key tools in ERM for the search is the TRP, Total Risk Profiling. So this is a workshop-based approach where a facilitator lead team develops a risk profile by determining relative rating, so in probability and severity for potential risk scenarios. So you will see that you still have the probability and severity, but now you have 6 levels for the probability and 4 levels for the severity. And they will have this like each risk to be classified into one entry, and then the right part will be prioritized, and for the blue part they might decide whether they will take some action or not. Okay, so actually after that they will make some decision like the risk reduction or the risk improvement advice. Okay, so this picture is something is a risk room in a Zurich company. So this is a 3D risk analysis tool, and it helps Zurich to explore major global risks in a country by country basis. And the idea is not to see one risk in isolation, but it is how risks and geographies combines, and how country risks profiles differ, and how different risks may correlate. So you might find out there are different categories, but some risks might affect different countries in different ways. For example, the corruption, it is like this one. Okay, so this is a strategic tool for the global risk mapping and decision supporting instead of just a simple chart. Okay, so let's summarize the Zurich case with one observation. So the Zurich has been running its ERM framework for more than 10 years. It is rated strong and excellent by Standard & Poor's across every ERM dimension. That is not happen overnight or over 1 year. It is a long-term work. So the ERM is not something you install. It is something you build slowly, consistently over years. And the longer you invest in it, the richer your risk data becomes. And the more embedded the culture gets, the more refined your tools are, and the more value it generates. Okay, so this is today's recording, and if you have any more information needed,